everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pitchers podcast. This is episode number 185, and I am your host, Max Colville. Joining me, as always, is my co-hostess with the mostest, Evan Crean. Hello, Evan.
Hey, Max. How's it going?
It's going really well. We're into 2025, fresh new year of movies to be excited about.
Yep.
We took a long break.
We did.
It always feels like super long because we have that like mid-December and then like kind of drop off for the holidays and come back. And I'm really excited to talk movies with you. I know that you and I actually met up in person recently and we talked a little bit about movies, but this is more grounded movies conversation, and it's always fun to talk with a fellow film lover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when we see each other in person, listeners, we also talk about our families, what's been going on, and video games and other things. It's not just movies. So try to keep most of the movie conversation for here, for your listening pleasure.
Right. Like Evan told me he saw a movie that is now available on digital, A Real Pain, and he's going to talk about it later. And we made sure to cut that conversation short so we can save it for the airwaves.
Yep, save it for the mic.
But since we've been gone, there was a lot of holiday movies released. You had some of the smaller box office movies, such as like Baby Girl. We talked about Nicole Kidman before, and actually, since we had our discussion, Criterion has a new package on the Criterion channel about Nicole Kidman movies. Should you want to check out some of the ones that we talked about, or some other discoveries of Nicole Kidman, that's well worth checking into. Other movies
I plan to.
Other movies that came out over the holidays include the Robert Eggers Nosferatu from Focus Features, and it's actually making pretty good money for itself, Evan. And now
that's good.
It's climbing upwards of $70 million, and I don't think I would have ever pegged that movie to make that kind of money, but I guess audiences are excited, or they just wanted the demon of Christmas to come out.
Yep, they're like, I need me some gothic horror for the holidays.
And what was supposed to be like the big family film competition, Evan, was Sonic the Hedgehog 3 from Paramount against Mufasa, the Lion King, of course, Barry Jenkins' latest feature after directing the great movies Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. So he and Underground Railroad did the TV series for Amazon. But
How'd they do?
It didn't do well the first 2 weeks, but surprisingly, Mufasa is now number one at the box office in its third weekend.
Okay.
It has grossed almost 170 million, whereas Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has grossed 187 million. So pretty comparable between the two movies now that they're trading places atop the leaderboard, where I'm sure they'll stay for at least a few more weeks. I know Paramount has some other movies coming soon, whether it was the one-time this had Oscar buzz nominee September 5th, or the Robbie Williams music biopic Better Man, which is supposed to come out in about a week's time, where Robbie Williams is replaced with a CGI monkey playing him. And yeah.
What a premise.
Yeah. Well, some people have said, Evan, I haven't seen the movie yet, and I do want to see it because I liked his songs Millennium, and I think the other one is like Angel or something, or Angels. And they said like he wanted to be in his own biopic, but he was too old and it wouldn't work, so instead they just replaced him and he could voice the CGI monkey, and that's like how his ego could fit into his own movie. And I'm like, maybe I'd buy that. I mean, I could totally see why it would go like that. But yeah, I mean, the holidays came and went, and the people went to the movies. I don't think like there was some big smashes. I think like what surprised me was how fast that Lord of the Rings animated movie came and went. Uh, I thought it would be like a big deal for Warner Brothers, but when it ultimately came out, it was almost like, oh, we needed to do something with Lord of the Rings so that we could keep it in our library, and we
Mm-hmm.
kind of like threw out this cheap animated film, and um, people checked it out if they wanted
Yeah, that was barely even a blip on my radar.
to. Yeah, it's already out for rental on digital. So if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings and you haven't, you fall into that strange category of Lord of the Rings fans that really wanted an anime of Lord of the Rings, then maybe this is the movie for you.
Did you watch it, Max? Have you seen it?
I haven't yet, and I am of that audience who likes Lord of the Rings and anime, and
Mm-hmm.
I think like it's something that I wanted to see. I It's funny, Evan, and like this is almost inside baseball a little bit with award season, but I kind of know like when a studio doesn't send us something that's coming out in December or early January to like consider for award season that it's probably like pretty disposable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. I think if they're not even going to bother to send a digital screener, that's not a good sign because a lot of studios have started doing that now. We got a lot fewer discs this year than we have in previous years.
Right, and it was just like, oh, if you can't be bothered to do that, to like say that your movie's worthy against these other movies, then probably it's not going to be very good. And yeah, and I guess the reviews have proven that point. But Evan, we also hosted our own BOFCA results, our own, speaking as you and I are members of the Boston Online Film Critics Association,
We are, yeah.
and held our awards over mid December. I think the awards were announced on December 15th.
Yep.
And yeah, it seems that The Brutalist took home our Best Picture award.
Yep. Few awards. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Adrian Brody, Best Supporting Actor for Guy Pearce. So it definitely racked up. Oh, and Best Cinematography for Lowell Crowley. So yeah, racked up a bunch of awards. But it's funny. I feel like in this year, less so than previous years, there wasn't like, although The Brutalist won several awards, like it didn't dominate like we've had in previous years with certain films where they took home like a ton of the awards, like in the Best Actress and some of the other categories. I feel like there was more of a mix this year.
Yeah, and for me, I'll talk about this as we talk about what our feature is tonight, going through some of our favorite films of 2024. And on a whole, there will be people out there that tell you, oh, it wasn't a weak year. You just had to look out for stuff on the radar. And no, I'm here to tell you that it was probably a weak year. I wasn't over the moon about as many films as maybe I normally am, and maybe that was a preview why I was like looking at the fall film festival circuit, Evan, and like how the movies were um, being reviewed by fellow critics, and just the overall excitement about certain movies seems kind of lackluster at best. I know like one of the champions that critics are loving right now, Nickel Boys. It didn't really do too much for me. I mean, like I think I ended up having it in my top 10 because it has and won my list because it does like some really interesting things, but I wasn't like over the moon for it.
Yeah, Nickel Boys I thought had some really inventive and really amazing cinematography, but even though it had that and was visually compelling, there were a few things about it that didn't work for me. I think its first person perspective was both fascinating and infuriating because it just felt very like one note. And then also it's kind of like vignette style storytelling for me was just such a slog to get through. It just didn't quite form any kind of rhythm as I was watching it. I talked about this on Spoiler Piece with my co-hosts. I understand that it's kind of messy in the vein of like, oh, it's trauma and memories just kind of spill out and very stream of consciousness, but it just didn't work for me. It just did not.
Yeah, and uh, looking at the list of some of the films that won BAFTA awards, it seems like a lot of people were really high in The Substance, that came close to winning our best picture of the year.
I still haven't seen it.
uh, that's surprising, Evan, considering you're such a horror guy, and that is like one of the most acclaimed horror films of the year.
Yeah, it's been on my list. It's been low on my list. I haven't gotten to it. I feel like people had such polar opinions about it that I've been a little bit wary to watch it because the people who love it really love it, and the people who hate it seem to really hate it.
Yeah, and I know like one of the ones that you and I will talk about that showed up in each of our top tens was the movie Conclave, and I do some of the social media work for BAFTA, and so I was seeing some of the reactions come in, and one of the ones I thought was interesting, I hadn't noticed it right away, was that Conclave won our best ensemble, but didn't appear in our top 10 films. So
Yeah,
that was maybe a pretty strong feeling for the ensemble, or like enough people put it there, but maybe not strong enough to like feel that it was a top 10 movie.
yeah, it's weird. I'm wondering if not a lot of people in the group saw it. Because I didn't really see it across people's ballots in general, and I'm kind of surprised because I thought it was one of the best movies from last year, obviously.
Yeah.
And I was just surprised that it didn't do more in our awards because I thought it was prime too.
Yeah, and like I'm not privy to share the demographics of BAFTA, but like certainly if you're interested in looking at some of our members, you can go on BAFTA's website and check out who's involved, and make your own determination on whether or not some of the people in our voting body would turn in for something like Conclave. But certainly I think different voting bodies will feel differently about different movies, and that's what's exciting about all these different groups. I mean, if we all uniformly had the same opinion, that'd be pretty boring.
Yes. That's true.
But yeah, that was the. Was there anything else you wanted to point out about the BAFTA results, Evan, that you hadn't mentioned before?
Uh, no, I mean you brought up the substance, showing up in there, and Conclave, just a smidge. I mean, I thought the overall top 10 for awards was pretty solid. It was interesting. The Brutalist and the Substance were at the top, and then we had like Honora. I saw the TV Glow, Dune Part 2, Nickel Boys, Hard Truths, which is another one I feel like I need to see because a lot of people really loved it in the group. Flow, which I loved. Wicked, which I saw after voting, but also thought was really good. And Nosferatu, which wasn't my cup of tea, but I can understand why people were really into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like seeing some of those made sense to me afterwards. I mean, uh, given the popularity of something like Wicked, most people are interested in asking me when I tell them that I watch films as part of my living. What I think about Wicked, and I'm like, well, I like it better than the stage musical, and I did watch it twice, so I recommend it. So if anybody's out there who are still like on the fence about whether or not they should see Wicked, or be wary that it's 2.5 hour musical, it's a pretty solid musical as far as these things go.
It is, yeah. I mean, I like musicals. I'm not the biggest musical fan, but I did very much enjoy Wicked, and it did move. I felt like it was well paced, and having seen it, I do feel like there's plenty more story to explore in another movie. It didn't feel like, a cheap cash grab move where we just end the movie artificially so that we have a second one. It did feel like there was a lot more to cover in part two.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I know we won't talk about Wicked too much because it won't show up on either of our ballots here, but I agree that there was enough there to justify having two films where the argument could be made before you see it that it was just all for the money. But I think what will be most exciting about the second half of the second movie is that I think that the musical is like first act loaded. Like that's where all the memorable songs come from,
Mhm.
and the second act isn't as exciting. But we'll see how that measures up. And I mean that's a problem with most musicals. I mean, even I've seen Hamilton probably like 2 or 3 times now, and it's like, yeah, that's also like the first act is really good, and it's hard to kind of separate them. So whether or not people will separate the two movies in their mind or just always think of them as one remains to be seen.
Right.
But yeah, Evan and I would like to share our top tens. From my understanding, Evan, you've done this exercise a little bit already, right? On our sister podcast, Spoiler
Yeah.
Piece.
Yeah, we did. We always, as our kind of like last episode of the year, go over our respective top tens, and often there's overlap. So usually, like whoever talks about it first gets the, we'll talk about it the most, or we'll just kind of chime in, and then when it gets to whoever has it on there, they're just like, okay, yeah, that was my number 5 too. Okay, moving on. But yeah, I mean, I think you and I also have very different top tens. There's some overlap for sure. So I think there's some things that'll be good for us to talk about together, and movies that I have on my list that I haven't talked about with you. So I mean, there's definitely some stuff to dig into.
Right, and I just want to say first of all, when we do this, we're not gonna have time to go into each individual movie out of the 10.
Right.
Hopefully, us naming that movie or just giving it a shout out will be enough for our respective audience to go ahead and look up the film and see if it's something that they'd enjoy. A lot of these films have begun making their way out on digital. I think the only one that I'll be talking, like briefly mentioning, is a film called Universal Language, and it's the Canada's entry for Best International Film this year, and I think it's being distributed by Oscilloscope Laboratories and like a very small kind of release in February or March of 25. So I hope that people do look for it, but know that I probably won't be going too much into it.
Cool.
Okay, so how do you think we should do this, Evan? Should we list our 10, or should we just pick out the ones we want to talk about and then share our 10 at the end?
Yeah, let's talk about the ones we want to talk about, and then at the end we can loop back and give our full top tens. Just kind of list them out.
All right, Evan. I've been talking a lot as always to start this podcast off. Would you share with us one of your movies that you'd like to talk about today?
Sure. Let's see. So one of the ones that I want to talk about, I had kind of a theme to my top couple of movies, very religious themed movies were ones that definitely resonated with me last year. But I wanted to talk about Heretic, which is written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, and stars Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, and Chloe East. And for those who may not be familiar, it's about two young women who are Mormon, and they're doing their missionary work, and they go to this guy's house, Hugh Grant, and he sits them down, and basically, like, they're supposed to be there having this, religious conversation, and they very quickly realize that just something is not right here. They're not supposed to be alone with him. His wife is supposed to be there, and he says, "Oh, she's in the other room. She's making blueberry pie." They realize he's got, a blueberry candle burning, and it turns into this really claustrophobic cat and mouse kind of game with this clearly deranged man who has his own ideas about religion and faith, and it is both an ideological battle and a physical and mental battle of wits. And I really, really enjoyed it because I think Hugh Grant is just having a blast playing this villain. I love seeing him play villains and love to see him play more villains because I think he's really good at it. And he's just exceptionally creepy in this movie. And I very much enjoy the use of space. I think his house has this very unique construction to it with a lot of kind of like weird locking mechanisms and secret rooms and passageways. And there's parts in the movie where you can kind of, he has like a model of his house that he's playing with, and you can kind of see them moving through the model as they're moving through the house. And I thought that was all really, well done. And I also appreciated that the leader at their church is played by Topher Grace, and he's in a very bit part, and he's kind of nosing around and trying to find them. And there's this great scene where he like shows up at the door looking for them, and then Hugh Grant's like, "Oh no, they're not here," and then he's like, "Okay." And then he leaves, and then you hear a knock at the door again. Oh, I thought I should leave you with this pamphlet. It's so great.
No,
Max, you saw Heretic, right?
yeah, and what you said about the house is really, outside of Hugh Grant, one of the most exciting parts of the movie for me too. They established that like the house is like built into like a cliffside or something, so like what you see on the outside of the house is very much an illusion. The house goes much deeper into this like mountainside and
Yeah.
really interesting ways. I think outside of those measures, I also really enjoyed the dialogue. I know that like some people maybe it's too preachy. I think that's entirely the point, but Hugh Grant is very into giving lectures through most of this movie, and if you don't jive with him giving these elaborate lectures about different versions of Monopoly, then maybe you won't be along for the ride. But you can deal with that. You get a pretty fun and twisty little movie there.
It's the dialogue. You're right. Is fantastic, and I love that the two leads in this movie are very much matching wits with him and trading verbal barbs with him, and that's a lot of fun. And there's also just kind of like I think a subversion of expectations in that, there's two of them and one of them seems a little bit more naive, and it turns out that she can handle herself quite well, and kind of starts unraveling the mystery and figuring things out, and really can go toe to toe with Hugh Grant. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it was one of those movies that like kind of just snuck up on things, and it looked fun when the first trailer came out, and it's like I love seeing Hugh Grant as a villain again. Like it's easy to point to his role in Paddington 2 and how much fun he had as the villain in that, playing like all these different disguised roles as the villain in Paddington 2. But yeah,
Yeah, and I liked him in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
I thought he was great in that too.
Yep. So yeah, it's fun seeing Hugh Grant try those different things, and moving on from being the guy who stars in romantic comedies.
Yeah, exactly. Max, what's one on your list?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to explore a movie outside of my list because stuff like Baby Girl I might have talked about last week with Nicole Kidman and how much I enjoyed it, or Challengers it seems like it's been out for almost a year now, so I didn't want to necessarily jump into that. So I wanted to talk more about the documentary that's on Netflix called The Remarkable Life of Evelyn. I think it was out of Sundance. It was just called Evelyn. And it's about this young man who he has an illness that is going to take his life at a young age. And he's kind of like losing the ability of his functionality and can't move very well. And I guess in his early 20s, he starts getting involved with World of Warcraft, the online MMORPG, and he spends hours at a time at it. And his family just doesn't necessarily understand his love of the game or why he spends so much time in that world, but they kind of resolve themselves to let him be happy if that gives him joy in those days. And when he ultimately passes, they discover that he had this whole entire other life inside of World of Warcraft, where he was able to go on adventures and meet lots of people and influence other people's lives, and it was very moving for them. And what was maybe the icing on the cake for this documentary, which really makes it exciting, is that since the young man who was in this situation was part of a guild, and the guild had records of all the chats
Oh,
that
cool.
that he had ever done inside of World of Warcraft. So they were able to use the engine of World of Warcraft and recreate um, specific moments that he did in the online world.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, I thought that was really ingenious, and it shows like how he was able to talk to all these different people, and they find the people who were behind those avatars and interview them as well for this documentary. And his parents got to learn like just how many people he touched, where they thought like maybe he was just housebound. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I've had some friends who have played World of Warcraft and have made uh, terrific bonds or made friends from all over the world from playing the game. And while the game can be addicting, and I don't endorse World of Warcraft emphatically, I do think about these online worlds and how people are able to connect through different platforms. And just I don't know, the documentary really moved me. I thought like it would be interesting at first, but it went another level than I had expected.
That sounds like a really moving and fascinating documentary.
Yeah, because like so many documentaries, Evan, we see, they have talking heads, like not the band Talking Heads. I want to be clear with
Right.
our audience, but like it's a form of documentary where you have the people sitting and they're talking to the camera, and they're giving their background, and that's pretty much all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this one feels like they did something really ingenious with being able to recreate those moments and just take us into this world that otherwise would not have been possible.
Yeah, I'm always happy when documentaries use more interesting forms of storytelling. That's always nice. Like you said, it's a nice break from the talking head, which has its place and I think can be interesting when you have dynamic people. I think of there's a documentary about The Exorcist, which is literally just William Friedkin sitting there talking about The Exorcist, and he's such a compelling person that it works
Yeah,
as a documentary.
I've seen that one too, and I really enjoyed that documentary. But also, I think that has the pre concept that you have to want to know more about The Exorcist.
Right on. Yeah.
Uh, But if you're into The Exorcist already, yeah, it's definitely worth watching.
Hmm.
But like for me, Evan, one that I want to shout out for documentaries that I've enjoyed over the last few years that maybe don't get shouted out a lot was this movie by Edgar Wright called The Sparks Brothers, and it was all about the band Sparks, and it kind of introduced me, and as I'm sure many other people, to their music, and I loved that documentary and all the different formats and things that they mixed into it, and it was such a wonderful um, band and topic that it just was truly a fantastic documentary.
I mean, I love Edgar Wright as a filmmaker, and I think he is a dynamic storyteller. So that adds up.
All right, yeah, so that's Ibelin, or The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, and that's available to stream on Netflix right now. For you, Evan, Heretic, what that's available to rent digitally at this point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And then I think A24, don't they have like an a Max deal going on right now? So maybe it will show up on Max eventually.
Yeah, yeah. I think. Well, that the Brandy horror movie. I think that was A24. I saw that that's available on
Hmm.
Max. So yeah, I think you might be right that they have stuff going there.
All right. What's your next movie?
Well, I guess as long as we're on the topic of documentaries, I did want to shout out a documentary I saw that it made my ballot in the documentary category for BAFTA, but it didn't make my top 10. But I think it's worth mentioning, and it's called Chasing Amy,
Hmm.
and it's by the filmmaker Sav Rogers, who is a trans man, and he actually comes out as trans through the documentary, which is interesting unto itself. But he made this documentary because the film Chasing Amy was so impactful on him as a queer person, and he saw it and was obsessed with it, and it gave him solace and comfort and it was just so vital. So he was like, okay, I want to make this documentary about it because, over the years, it's had such a complicated legacy where on one hand, people look at the film and say, okay, this was a really groundbreaking movie because it was talking about sexuality in a way that people weren't talking about it openly in such a mainstream way. But then there's so many other people that are like, this movie is really complicated because it says and does a lot of bad things for the queer community. It has a lot of bad messages in it. And so I think this documentary is really fascinating because it looks at the movie, warts and all, the positive things about it, the not so positive things about it, and it looks at Kevin Smith as a filmmaker, but it also explores the relationship between Kevin Smith and Joy Lauren Adams, who played Amy in Chasing Amy, and the complications of their relationship, that they were dating when they made this movie, and they broke up. And so Kevin Smith has a lot of positive associations with it because he felt like, he was kind of like processing his own relationship. But she has a lot of negative associations with it because, a lot of people love this movie, but it also represents a time that was very tumultuous in her life and not a time that she wants to be reminded about. So it's a really insightful documentary. It's a lot of fun. And it really digs into a movie that I didn't realize we needed to dig so deeply into. So I definitely recommend it. I don't know where you can find it at the moment. It might be it looks like it's available to rent. So that's one I wanted to shout out. Not on my top 10, but definitely I think a movie that goes deep on chasing on Chasing Amy. So I dug it.
Yeah, I think it's been a long time since I watched that movie, and in general any Kevin Smith movie, but yeah, that's like a early Ben Affleck role, right?
Yeah, it's one of his earlier roles. Yeah, him and Jason Lee are the kind of the co-leads in that.
You shared one off your top 10 and on your top 10, and I have not shared one on my top 10 yet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk briefly again about the movie I Saw the TV Glow. This one was an A24 release that came out, like, I want to say like March or April, after premiering at Sundance to a lot of acclaim. It's directed by the director Jane Schoenburn and stars Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne as two high school students that don't really fit in the world, and they find this late night TV show, which instantly makes me think of like Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is on purpose, but
yeah, I would say it's much more modeled after Buffy the Vampire Slayer, considering we even have a cameo from the actress who played Tara on Buffy in the movie.
Yeah, I could see that too, Evan. I mean, the Nickelodeon stars Pete and Pete also show up as a cameo in the movie. So
I didn't even notice that. When were they in there?
I think like when like the house is burning down or something like that, like after like a scene where Fred Durst is in. So
oh man,
yeah, it's hard to find them, but they're in there because like I guess Jane Schoenburn was very influenced by those like late night Canadian shows, and like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Buffy, and wanted to make a movie where these youths are finding their way through this TV show and their love for it, and it takes a turn in the movie where Bridget Lundy Payne's character kind of disappears, and they meet up again at this bar that's very reminiscent of Twin Peaks: The Return, where they have concerts, and she is obviously inspired by David Lynch as well. It's funny. She was on the Blank Check podcast recently talking about Twin Peaks: The Return. Obvious reference there. Underneath the story is a big trans narrative. Jane Schoenburn is a trans woman, and she really makes it so that the reason why these youths are uncomfortable as maybe they never felt comfort in their own skin, and the movie has this great message where it's like, um, it wants to tell people that it's never too late, and that if you've always felt that something was wrong, or you weren't right in your skin, then there's never a time too late to examine whether or not um, you'd be a bit better suited in a different way. And I thought that was a very powerful message. And while I get like, I think I talked to Evan briefly off the show about some concerns about the third act, where I guess Bridget Lundy Payne kind of comes back into the picture, and they're at a planetarium, and she's giving a pretty big speech, and kind of telling Justice Smith's character that they are in bodies that aren't their own, and they have to do this really wild thing in order to kind of find solace, and he's just not ready to take that step. I don't know.
Yeah.
I found the movie like really nostalgic for me with all that late night stuff. I like when I mentioned All You Afraid of the Dark, Evan, I think specifically of like Snick and like Saturday night Nickelodeon shows, and
Yeah.
I felt a lot of that, and it's just really neat to have a movie that kind of spoke to that era, and that's one of the things that I really loved about it. And yeah, but what was your thoughts on it?
I think yeah, I was really into it, and I felt like it kind of fizzled for me in the third act, but I was really compelled by the cinematography. I think it's really striking in the film, and the movie's very atmospheric. And one of the things I think that really stands out about it is the way that it captures the vibe and the essence of the 90s
Mm-hmm.
in such a striking way that I don't feel like other movies have been able to capture. It feels so quintessentially 90s. It just took me right back to the time, like you were mentioning, about thinking about late night Nickelodeon TV and Snick, and there's a scene where there's a Fruitopia machine that they're standing next to, and it so much brought me back to childhood days. And I think that's the thing that for me was most successful, is it captured the kind of 90s vibe so well, and really I think was effective in exploring niche subcultures and people who exist in them, and find solace in friendship, whether when it's you're obsessed with this weird show and that's all you can talk about and think about, and you're able to bond and form friendships with people and kind of get through high school, which is not easy. So I dug those aspects of the movie for sure.
Yeah, what was crazy to me is like, maybe it shouldn't be, is like when you would talk to some people afterwards and they didn't get like the narrative through line through it, and I'm like, how much more obvious do you need it to be? It's
Yeah.
like, um, yeah, maybe the movie didn't hit it over the head hard enough for you. I did enjoy that. There's like a creepy ice cream cone like monster, which seems like out of
Oh
right out of
yeah.
those shows, and that was really
That
kind
felt
of
very
cool.
Power Rangers to me.
Yeah.
Like, pretty sure that was a monster in Power Rangers.
Yeah, so that's I saw the TV Glow. That was pretty high on my top 10 list this year. Um, Evan, what else do you have?
Let's see. So I wanted to talk about a movie that was on my ballot that I don't think a lot of people saw last year. It's called Mountains, and it's a drama, and it takes place in the Little Haiti area of Miami, and it's about this guy who's a demolition worker, and him and his family. They're Haitian, and it's a very kind of like working class story, and it's really interesting to see the kind of glimpse into his life and his family's life, and also really compelling and moving. And it's about the immigrant experience. It's about kind of the differences in the generations. Like, they have this son who is very Americanized, and he is doing stand up, and he is, trying to forge his creative path, and his parents, have these kind of very working class jobs. Like, his mom is like a crossing guard and a seamstress, and he's a demolition worker, and so they're kind of like struggling to understand where he's coming from. And so there's a little bit of that. And then there's this just gut wrenching story about gentrification, and this idea that he is the main character is going through and demolishing all these houses so they can put up, the new like fancy houses. And he finds this house in the neighborhood that he really wants to buy, and it's been fixed up and it looks really nice. And him and his wife are like grappling with, should we buy it? Should we like kind of like move up? Should we stay in our house? Should we move up? And the grappling with that. And I don't want to give away where it ends up, but it has a very kind of heartbreaking note that it ends on. And I just thought it was really compelling, and just a movie I loved and thought was really sweet and really interesting and very poignant, and one that not really anybody saw or talked about or heard about last year. So that's kind of why I'm championing the movie.
Yeah, this is actually one that I hadn't heard about. I think like I saw, now that I'm looking it up, I see a review on RogerEbert.com about it with Carlos Aguilar having written a review, 3.5 out of 4 stars, and that picture looked familiar to me. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it, because it's definitely a movie that even fell outside of my radar. Do you know where people can find it or who is releasing it?
Yeah, I think it's rentable. I'm looking here, and it looks like you can rent it on like something like Amazon. But let me just see here. Let's see what Just Watch has to say about it.
Yeah, that's where
Yeah,
I
it
went.
looks like you can rent it pretty much. Amazon, Apple TV. It's rentable. It's out there, so I definitely recommend tracking it down and watching it. It's short. It's like an hour and a half, but it's a very jam-packed hour and a half, emotionally speaking.
Yeah. All right, no, cool. That's Mountains, and yeah, you can rent it most places. Yeah, interesting. Evan, the next movie that I am going to talk about is The Brutalist, which again won BAFTA's award for best film. It has won its fair share of awards, and I know why it didn't appear on your list. You did end up catching up with it, and I had this like great idea, Evan, that I was going to write about my experience seeing The Brutalist, and for the newsletter. And I think ultimately I'm just going to share my thoughts about it here, in that I saw The Brutalist at the I believe it was Somerville Theater in a 70mm screening, and it was the night before the election, and there was a lot of unrest in the movie theater, and there's a sequence in the movie where Adrian Brody's character, who is a fictional brutalist kind of architect, and he has kind of made his way from Europe and Germany and what have you during World War II, and he's looking for a new life in America, and this idea that he's going to Pennsylvania, and there's like this whole pomp and circumstance about Pennsylvania, and everyone in the audience starts laughing because knowing that the next day how important Pennsylvania is going to be in the election, and
oh boy,
just like laughing at like what is depicted on the screen about Pennsylvania. And as the movie goes on, Adrian Brody's character meets a lot of different a lot of different people, of course, maybe none as important as the one who's played by Guy Pearce, who You
Yep.
know, he's a guy with a lot of money, and he doesn't really love Adrian Brody's work originally, but when people in the know start telling him how wonderful it was, he takes an interest in having Adrian Brody's character make another huge building for him.
Right. Yeah. His kids like try to surprise him with this library, and then he shows up when they're in the middle of working on it, and he throws them out, and then yeah, he loops back to him later and says, "Okay, well, I want to hire you to build this crazy church community center monument to my dead mother."
Yeah, and it's gonna be humongous, right? It's just like
Right.
otherworldly project, and of course he accepts because he needs work, and this is what he does, and a lot of the movie is separated into two acts. It's definitely an epic, with an
Yep.
intermission, and when it comes back from intermission, uh, some other family members enter the fray, and it changes a little bit. Some people say that the second half doesn't work as well as the first. Um,
I would argue I'm one of those people, but I feel like for me it was like the last hour I think that didn't quite work. Like I think because I was watching and I had to pause
mhm.
and pick it back up, and when I picked it back up with that last hour, I was like, no, it felt like it really fizzled for me.
Yeah, there's some subplots that really go in another direction.
Yeah,
Certainly, there's a big impetus on Adrian Brody's character and how his effects from surviving Germany and such kind of played on his life and his addictions and what have you. But
yeah, things kind of devolve.
yeah, for me, Evan, what I really took away from it at the end was this idea that like why they came to America to find like this joy or happiness that they had heard so much about. They discovered that America just wanted to chew them up and spit them out, and didn't really care about you know giving them a home or making their lives happy. And this immigrant experience of just like, yeah, we thought America was great, but fuck it, let's leave. I thought that was like a very profound kind of message to make, especially on the eve of the election, and in this world that we're in, and how immigrants might feel coming to America, and just generally unwelcomed.
Yeah, I mean it definitely some striking anti-Semitism in the movie that you see, and also just general broader xenophobia against immigrants in general. And yeah, I don't know, it definitely it is an indictment of the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I think that's a very sharp message of the film. I think toward the end I was really kind of unclear as to whether Laszlo decided to follow his wife, because it seemed like his wife was going to go to Israel to join their
Yep,
niece,
other
who was
family.
kind of like
Yeah.
their surrogate daughter, but it wasn't clear whether he was going to follow her or not. I didn't think that he did. It seemed like he stuck around in the U.S. Did you get a different impression from that?
Yeah, I don't. It's funny, like I don't want to like go too much detail into that, and we can certainly talk off air. But the movie almost has like a third act that is like the epilogue, and it takes
Right.
place many years later.
Yeah.
And
I think I was kind of jarred by that. It felt like it was like too much of a jump to me.
and like some of the stuff that happens in that ultimate like climax, it seems like a little unresolved.
Yep.
Um, but no, I loved it for the wild swings it made, and like how they made this epic on like, I guess the movie was, I don't know if the budget was like 10 million or 20 million, but like just like to make an epic on that scale in
Yeah.
in
I heard somewhere
2024.
10 million, and that
Yeah.
is very impressive to me because it does not. I mean, that's hardly a low budget, so to speak,
Mm.
but it is for a movie so grand in scope as this. So I was surprised that they made it for so little.
Yeah, and like I was equally surprised that like Adrian Brody had such a fantastic performance in him once again. Certainly he won the Oscar many years ago for The Pianist, and has been in numerous movies, whether or not it's been lead or supporting performances, but he really showed up for this one.
That he did.
And then Evan, you had one more on your list that you wanted to share.
Yeah. So I talked about it on Spoiler Piece, and I really enjoyed it. But I really enjoyed My Old Ass, which is just a funny title
Is
of
that
a
a
movie
movie,
to
or you're
say.
talking about your ass?
No, I'm talking about a movie, but it is it is the funny title of a movie, and also funny enough a joke in the movie. It's a really funny. It's written directed by Megan Park, and it's about Elliot, who is about to go away to college, and she lives on her family's cranberry farm, and she's like ready to kind of go away to the big city and study in Toronto, and she's ready to leave her family, and she does mushrooms with her friends, and then she meets her older self, who's played by Aubrey Plaza, during that mushroom trip, and then forms a friendship with her older self. And it's a coming of age story, and it's very funny and very sweet, and I don't know, I feel like it just has a lot of good stuff to say about growing up and change and life, and so I found it very sweet and very funny and very well acted all around by everyone in the cast, but particularly great performance from Macy Stella, who plays the lead character. Great performance from Aubrey Plaza. Another really awesome performance from Percy Hines White, who plays one of the supporting characters, this guy Chad, who she's hanging out with during the summer and gets to know. And yeah, it was really good. I was not expecting it to be as good as it was and to be as moved as I was watching it, but it really stuck with me.
Yeah, this is one that's available on Amazon Prime Video. I guess I didn't mention where The Brutalist was. I think it's still in theaters and probably coming to Max eventually.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've wanted to see this for a while. It was just like a topic that I was into, and like a coming of age film with this like this humor. And I remember like I almost tried to go see it in theaters and I didn't, and then it came on Amazon and I was like I had it on my list to watch and I didn't, but it's certainly one that I want to catch up with, and I'm glad to hear that it's really good.
It is. Yeah. Definitely check it out.
And then Evan and I had two movies that appeared on both of our top 10 lists. Um, I guess we'll save our conclave for our last discussion, because it's generally higher on both of our lists. And we'll begin with talking about Sean Baker's Anora, and that one, of course, is the darling of the year, with Neon having brought it to the Cannes Film Festival and it taking home the Palme d'Or, the highest honor of the Cannes Film Festival. It's been playing pretty well in theaters, and I guess it just came out available for digital rental. And this stars Mikey Madison as a woman of the night stripper. What's the
Yeah,
best way?
she's a sex worker. She's a
Yeah,
stripper and a sex worker. She kind of has a couple of different things that she's doing to make money.
yeah, and she has lots of clients that she meets, and but one evening she's asked to I guess she knows some Russian, and
Right.
she's asked to meet these high rollers who will speak heavy Russian and entertain them. And she gets involved with this young guy who has lots and lots of money, and he's just looking to have a good time. And lo and behold, things kind of get out of control, and out of control into the fact that he ends up proposing marriage to her. And she ultimately, accepts the idea that she could be this rich man's like arm candy. But
Right.
the movie kind of has a second half twist to it where uh, life wasn't going to be that quite easy for Honora. And it's funny when the movie's called Honora, right? But like she's very often in the movie she says like, "My name's Annie," and like
Yeah.
when you watch it, you'll just be like, "What?" And like, yeah, that over and over again, she like corrects people.
Right. She doesn't like people calling her Honora. She
Yeah.
prefers Annie.
Um, but like Evan, when it like the first half of the movie, I was like, what did people see in this? This seems like pretty like run of the mill, and then
Mhm.
like that like splice happens, and it feels like a Coen Brothers movie, where you have like these guys who like come in to make trouble, and but they're ridiculously overwhelmed by this young woman.
Right. Yeah. To give a little bit more context, listeners. So the guy that she marries is a young dumb son of a Russian oligarch. So he has a crap ton of money, but it's all his dad and mom's money, and they're none too pleased to hear that he's run off to Vegas and married a stripper. And he basically the dad sends his kind of like henchmen over to kind of force their hand and say, okay, you guys got to get this marriage annulled, lickety split, and they get into it. They she's like fighting with these guys, and they kind of like reluctantly team up because the kid like runs away, and it becomes, as Max mentioned, a dark comedy very much in the vein of a Coen Brothers movie. And I think you're nailing it, Max, about why this movie is so fun and why I enjoyed it, because it does turn into this really funny dark comedy that is kind of this weird long adventure for them
Mm.
trying to track this idiot kid down. And they just hate each other's guts, Nora and these henchmen, but then they also kind of are on the same page. They're kind of like mutually frustrated by this idiot kid.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely worth what it's worth tuning into. But I've heard other people echo that kind of sentiment where like they thought it was meh, it was all right, and then they got to that part, and then they're like, okay, now I get it. Now I get why people enjoy this movie.
Yeah, yeah, because so much of that early beginning is like almost like telegraphed from like if you've seen like one trailer of it, or like you can understand like what's going on, and it's like, oh well, I've seen something like this. What makes it so exciting? And I mean, I guess ultimately what holds the glue together the whole thing is Mikey Madison. Of course, she's uh, been well praised for her performance in the film, and certainly has
Right.
already won plenty of awards. And um, she definitely works very hard to make a good performance um, in this movie.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was very skeptical going in because I've felt very lackluster about the Sean Baker movies that I've seen, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this one.
Hmm. Yeah, he tends to make movies about like I guess disenfranchised people, whether or not it's the people who are living in like the slums in Florida, where you have like the Florida Project, or you have like I guess someone who's working in pornography, like in Red Rocket. So
Yep, kind of has a niche, I guess.
yes. So yeah, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed Honora, and ultimately I think that's why it's doing so well, in all these different awards bodies, because like it's the type of movie that I don't know if everybody feels like it was the best movie of the year, but it's certainly um, in the top 10 for a lot of people, I'm sure, and that is going to do a lot to carry it along.
That's for sure.
And then Evan and I felt most strongly probably together on Conclave, and maybe we're like two old dad men who like dad movies, but Evan.
I think this is more than a dad movie. I will own up to liking dad movies. Like Tom Hanks, pretty much anything he's in lately is a dad movie, and I'll own up to liking those dad movies. But I think this is a really solid thriller.
Yeah, I guess I'll give it a little bit more than that. I know I went with my wife to see it in theaters, and we were like shocked at all its twists because it's adapted from a book I think of the same name, and has if you think you've figured out one twist, there's like 5 more coming. So it is a wild ride for a movie that you would expect would be kind of boring, right? Yeah, on paper, it's like it has like a lot of fantastic actors, but what could be so exciting about choosing the next pope?
Yeah, and that's exactly what the movie answers. There's plenty to be exciting about choosing the next pope, especially when you've got kind of several players in the mix who are very powerful in the church and kind of have their own unique ideas for how the church should be run moving forward. But then there's all kinds of seedy elements going on underneath it all, and a dark horse contender who kind of shows up out of nowhere. So, yeah, I really enjoyed Conclave a lot. I was kind of primed to like it because you kind of have, I've been calling it the trifecta of Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, and John Lithgow, who are like 3 like really amazing actors, kind of at the head of this movie. But when I did see it, I thought, wow, okay, this is really well done. This is a taut thriller.
And it was
it's
funny,
really
like,
interesting.
I think like on one of the podcasts where I think it's like the Town podcast of like one of the big Hollywood pundits who works at like Puck News or something. I think like his name is Matt Bellini or something like that, and he talks with like one of the heads of Focus Features with Conclave, and like just about like what films go to what fall festivals, and like I guess there was like this kind of discussion about whether or not Conclave should premiere at Venice or should it premiere at Telluride or what have you, and just thinking about where it would play, and I'm just like, this movie seems like it should play everywhere, not necessarily like one festival over the other, I guess. I thought it was it's really exciting. I mean, to set the ground, like there's a pope who passes away, and Ray Fiennes is kind of in charge of the whole process of selecting the next pope.
Yep.
And he's trying to keep everything in order, and while everyone behind the scenes is trying to like manipulate the vote and raise the profile for their preferred candidate. And just as much, if you think like everything's gonna go easy and fun, there's of course a lot at stake here too. You have like, when you think about the Catholic Church, you have the ultra conservative part of the Catholic Church, I guess, and then you have the more liberal side of the Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah. So. Or you kind of have there's like an Italian guy who's one of the cardinals. He really wants to be pope, but he's part of the, we should have an Italian pope, and he's the more like regressive conservative, and then you have Stanley Tucci who's like more liberal. You have John Lithgow who's kind of in the middle. There's like another guy who's in the running, and then also there's a while where Ray Fiennes ends up in the running, and he's not even really expecting that to be the case. He's kind of like, no, I don't want it, and everyone's like, well, you don't want it, that's good. We want someone who doesn't want power to have power. It's a lot of twists and turns. It becomes a bit of a detective story at points. It's hell yeah, Conclave.
It's a lot of fun. I guess Edward Berger, who directed the All Is Quiet on the Western Front kind of new adaptation a year or two ago. He's the one who directed this movie, and he works with the same composer again and makes some really striking work. And I don't know, Evan. Conclave worked for me on another number of levels. So
yep.
If you haven't seen Conclave, you can rent it. I think it's now streaming on Peacock if you want to get a month of Peacock and watch Conclave too.
Right. Or as I like to call it in my house, Perkirk.
Evan, before we go into what we've been watching, I'm going to share my top 10, starting from 10 up to 1. I like the aforementioned Challengers, then Baby Girl, Universal Language, All We Imagine as Light, Conclave, Honora, Furiosa, I Saw the TV Glow, The Brutalist, and Dune Part 2.
Solid. And then my top 10 from 10 to 1 was Oddity, Blink Twice, Love Lies Bleeding, Honora, My Old Ass, Mountains, Flow, Heretic, Conclave, and First Omen. And now you can see what I was mentioning before about having a religious theme. Grappling with religion was part of my top 10 this year.
Yeah, and like we said what we were doing, we'd encourage you to go to Just Watch, the website, and if you're wondering where to find one of these movies that we mentioned and want to see if it's streaming or available to rent, that's an excellent way to keep tabs on these movies.
Yep. Just Watch is key, listeners. It's where I go anytime I need to know where to find something.
Now, Evan, I sort of gave my thoughts. Like, I thought it was like a weaker year than most. Do you share that sentiment, or do you?
You know, typically I don't share that sentiment any given year. And I know my co-hosts on Spoiler Piece feel very strongly about every year. Like, oh, if you didn't find good stuff, you just weren't watching enough. This year, I truly did feel like it was a weak year. I think I'm in your camp. I did not have a very hard time putting together a top 10 list, as it is often a struggle to me. In any given year, I usually have like a top 20 or 25 that I have to whittle down to a top 10. This year, I was kind of like, I maybe had a top 15. It was not that hard to whittle down to 10. So I think that's a barometer for me that this was just not as strong of a movie year.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, for me, when Dune Part 2 comes out so early, and like that's just a movie that I thought was like on a level of like, oh, this is exactly what I wanted an adaptation of Dune to be, and they nailed it, and from top to bottom, I never thought they'd be able to pull it off, and I just had to like kind of award that for being exactly what I wanted it to be. I'm like, then I felt pretty strongly about The Brutalist as being like a great idea, but like even then, I think like some years I've felt much more strongly about some of my films that like I picked in my top 5 than I do this year.
Yeah. This wasn't a strong year. I'm just gonna be honest.
Well, hopefully 2025 will shower us with plenty of exciting new movies to watch. I'm certainly excited to hear about the stuff coming out of Sundance in a few weeks and start the season once again. So if you will stop for some station identification, and if you'd like to reach out to us, you can follow us at Blue Sky. I'm there at maxcolville.com, or you can just search me, Max Colville. The podcast also has a Blue Sky link, and it has an X account, and there's Instagram, of course, for it. If you want to reach us directly via email, it's thepitchers@gmail.com. Evan, where can they find you?
Let's see. Where can people find me? So I am on Twitter still, Twitter/X, whatever the hell it's called these days. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Letterboxd. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. My handle in all those places is Real Recon, which is real as in film reel. And then you can find me every week, but not this past week. I actually took a week off over at Spoiler Piece Theater, the weekly film podcast, where you find anywhere you get podcasts.
Right, and as always, if you want to follow the newsletter, it's thepitchers.substack.com. I do a lot of different things there. I posted my top 10 there, as well as shared some of my work from 2024. I think the next article I'm going to kind of do this upcoming week is about some of my film discoveries over 2024, movies that weren't exactly from the year 24, but older movies that I saw for the first time. I was really impressed with.
Oh, fun.
Before we get to our movies I've been watching, I want to shout out a former guest of the It's the Pictures podcast, Linda Codega. They have a new novel coming out, their first, on January 21st. The novel is under the fantasy category, and it's called Moth Eater. And should you want to check that out, that'd be great, and I'm sure Linda would love it. Yeah, they used to work at IO9, Evan, and they joined us for a podcast, I think like a year or two ago. So very happy to plug their new book, and wish them great success.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good for them. I'm now all I can think of is I'm hearing Moth Eater and the tune of Goldfinger from James Bond. Moth Eater. Don't know why, but that's what's going through my head.
Okay. So Evan, what have you been watching?
Well, as always, Max, I watch a lot of TV, but I did actually watch a movie. Funny enough, I did, as you mentioned earlier, I watched A Real Pain, which is Jesse Eisenberg's latest film he wrote and directed. It's about two kind of mismatched cousins played by Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, who go on a heritage tour in Europe, viewing. They're in Poland, seeing different areas, Jewish areas, and they go to visit a concentration camp at the end of it. And it's all about learning about their grandmother who passed away within the last, I think, year.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both grieving her loss. But Kieran Culkin's character Benji is more acutely feeling that loss. He was very close with her, and he's just been in kind of a depressed tailspin as of late. And the movie's about them, going on this trip together and reconnecting, but it's also about them kind of processing the intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust and also being very mismatched people. Benji is very outgoing and charismatic, but he also has the ability to kind of piss people off and say very honest things that are also quite hurtful to other people. And David, who's the more soft-spoken of the two, he doesn't like to make waves, but at the same time he also shuts himself out from a lot. And you could tell that he very much envies Benji's ability to be the life of the party, and he wishes he could be that way, but he just doesn't. He can't, and he sucks at it.
Yeah.
So, I thought this was a really awesome film. It was very kind of grounded, stripped down kind of buddy movie. It can be funny. It can be serious. I think there's two really good performances. I think Kieran Culkin's is stronger, but also I think he has more to work with as a character. And I think Jesse Eisenberg's kind of doing things we've seen him do before. Not poorly, but, he's kind of doing a lot of similar Jesse Eisenberg-esque stuff.
Well, he wrote the movie for himself. I guess he that's the way he sees himself.
Yeah. And I think they have a very strong chemistry, the characters and the actors, and I think that they feel like real cousins to me. I think that was definitely something that came through. And actually, it's funny you were just saying that at Max, because Sean and I were having kind of like a whole conversation while we were watching it, because Jesse Eisenberg wears these kind of like plain round frame glasses, and we were kind of like, do you think those are his glasses that he wears in real life? Yeah, probably. He seems like a plain round glasses kind of guy.
Yeah, and not to like harp on it, but like it's tough to see Kieran Culkin in this role, or like how brass his character can be. And I find that like that idea of the title "A Real Pain" can also be like, it's tough to sit there and watch his character in certain instances, and how he unravels in certain ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the title works on a lot of different levels, and I was glad that I caught up with this one because I knew a lot of people were talking about it last year, and it was just on my list forever. And I thought, okay, let's start off the new year by seeing one I absolutely should have seen last year.
It's a Jewish movie.
Yep. Yeah,
Through and through.
it is. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of really kind of striking scenes, but I think one that stood out to me was that he Benji, Kieran Culkin's character, gives us very pointed feedback to their tour guide, who's not Jewish at one point, and it's pretty harsh feedback. It's not wrong, but I think it's very harsh. And then there's a kind of moment later where they loop back around to it, and he's kind of like, "Thank you for that feedback. It really is helping. I think it's going to be really helpful to me to make this tour better." And I was not expecting that. It was just interesting to see how much Benji connected with everyone else on the tour and how much David was kind of an afterthought to them. And they were all kind of like, "Bye, Benji," and then like didn't say anything to David.
Yeah, so I think that one actually just came out available for rental very recently.
Yeah, I think that's available to rent.
So Evan, I rewatched a classic now available on 4K UHD from the Warner Archive collection, and this is The Searchers, a John Wayne movie directed by John Ford. And some people say like maybe Warner Archive is the perfect home for its release because its politics haven't really aged well, because inherently it's a movie which features John Wayne as a former Confederate soldier returning home after losing the war, and he quickly finds himself in a situation where some Indians have kind of come into his brother's home and murdered his brother's wife, and one of their children, and kind of like kidnapped the two daughters. So he's like, oh, I have to get these Indians and chase them down and hope that he can find these young women who were captured by the Indians. And so I guess it's really iffy politics now.
Yeah, it sounds like it based on your description.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and like just like this idea that Indians are terrible, and you need to like watch out for them. And but underneath it, there's still some really fantastic performances. It influenced a lot of famous directors who I remember seeing this documentary where like Martin Scorsese was talking about like influential films, and he was talking about The Searchers and how certain shots were, and the movie was filmed with a VistaVision, and so like when you play it in your 4K player on this new disc, which was an immaculate restoration, one of the best I've seen on the format, it takes up almost the whole screen due to that wide framing that they used for the movie. And yeah,
hey, didn't they shoot The Brutalist in VistaVision too?
I think so, and that's why
Yeah.
they were showing it on 70. But yeah, I think The Searcher still works as a movie. Like, it's very entertaining. There's this other character that kind of travels with John Wayne throughout the movie and is kind of like the moral compass. And yeah, if you haven't seen The Searchers or are looking for like a really pristine copy of a classic feature that you haven't seen before, I still recommend it, even with its kind of iffy politics in 2025. The other movie I wanted to talk about, which I watched right at the end of the wire, Evan, of voting, was the Timothée Chalamet A Complete Unknown, where he plays Bob Dylan. This one was like we had like a 24-hour window to watch it when they
Right.
sent out screeners, and there was like some big arguments among our members that you had to watch this movie. I don't necessarily feel like I had to watch it, but I definitely wanted to watch it.
Fun fact, I did not.
Yeah, so it takes place like over a period in the early '60s of Bob Dylan's life, and kind of dramatizes his meetings with Pete Seeger, who is played by Edward Norton in this film, and different relations at the time, him meeting like Joan Baez and what have you, and just like how his star kind of rose. And the movie ultimately ends at a kind of performance at the Newport Folk Festival. Of course, like that's interesting to me, right? Because the Newport Folk Festival is right here in Rhode Island and Newport, and so I kind of wanted to see how it goes, and it's pretty standard fare. Without like the Bob Dylan music, there'd be no reason to make this movie, and I guess you could make that argument about like any music movie, but more so here. My favorite thing about it was probably Edward Norton's performance as Pete Seeger. He's such a great actor, and
he is. I love Edward Norton.
I guess I know that he's probably very tough to work with. I mean, obviously Marvel was quick to get rid of him as the Hulk after his one stint as the Hulk. But I guess if you're able to get him in your movie and get a performance out of him, typically it's going to be of a high caliber.
I was like, I don't know. I don't think Rian Johnson had any problems wrangling him with Glass Onion.
But yeah. I guess like it's a fine movie, and people who are predisposed to like kind of like a movie about Bob Dylan and listen to that music, you're probably gonna enjoy yourself. But I don't think it was necessarily anything to write home about.
Fair, that's fair. You did not convince me to watch it.
No, I'm sure I didn't. You could just go listen to like Highway 61 Revisited if you're a Bob Dylan fan, and you probably would be happy.
Never really got into Bob Dylan.
That's another reason not to watch it, though.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up our first episode of 2025, Evan. We certainly have a lot of fun episodes coming up and big plans for the new year. So I'm excited to take on a fresh year with you for the It's the Pitchers podcast and see how it rolls.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Happy 2025.